This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening. I didn't print out an agenda, but
I have one.
would you consider my topic the on the agenda or off the agenda?
So I think you will be.
All I want to do is point out that they cut that piece off.
Okay. So I think we're just going to talk about when we're going to schedule the public hearings for that.
About
tonight.
what?
When we're going to schedule the public hearings for that.
No,
So-
okay.
So you might even be here early. They do have a copy of your email though.
I saw it, yeah. In
Did I just lose you guys?
No, Mr.
Okay.
Perry's here talking Travis's ear off. So
Oh, okay. Thank
wait
you.
just
I
a second.
just thought all of a sudden, whoa, I lost my sound.
I'm in a different room though, so he's safe from my odor.
Alrighty then.
All right, Travis, you ready to get started? Okay. I am going to call this meeting of the Woodland Planning Commission to order at 7:03 p.m. That was gavel, in case anybody missed that. I don't have my script in front of me. I apologize. Somebody been winging it again. So don't hesitate to jump in and correct me if I'm going out of order. But the Planning Commission exists to make recommendations to the City Council on all sorts of things. Sometimes we're quasi-judicial. I don't believe we are tonight. Oh, yeah, look at that. Okay. We hold workshops. We review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. And in some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, a hearings examiner, or a court. Thank you so much, Travis. All right, so tonight's Planning Commission is held as a conference call to comply with the governor's stay home, stay healthy orders. We will follow the same procedures we use for our meetings at council chambers. There will be opportunities for the public to comment at the beginning of the meeting for items that are not on the agenda and during the meeting for items that aren't on the agenda. So this is the agenda, call to order, we did that. First step after that then is citizen communication for items not on the agenda. I don't see anybody on the call who is not staff or commission.
We need roll call.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we
Yes.
do citizen communication for items not on the agenda, Janice, would you take roll?
Yes. Brian Matson.
Present.
Jason Hugo.
Present.
Thank you. Sam Nigro. And Tel Jensen.
Here I am.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up then is citizen communication for items not on the agenda. As I was saying, I don't think we're going to have any of that. We have one member of the public in council chambers, so I'll make sure real quick that he's not interested. Okay, and he is no longer in council chambers. So let's move on to approving the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay, fantastic. The motion was made by Brian Mattson and seconded by Jason Lugo. Any discussion from either of you?
Nope.
None from me.
Okay, fantastic. In that case, anyone opposed to approving the agenda, please say so now. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the agenda is approved. Next up, I believe we have consent items, which is we need to approve, I believe, July minutes was there. I think there were some other minutes as well that are left over. May,
Yes.
do we have May?
May meeting and July meeting.
Okay, great. So a motion for, can we do a motion for those together or do we need to do them separately, James?
Separately would be preferable, please.
Okay, fantastic. Let's start with the May minutes then. Could I have a motion to approve the May minutes?
A motion that we move to approve the May minutes.
Thanks, Jason. Brian, you can't tell, but I'm looking at you right now.
I don't think I was here for May or July. Was I? Or maybe I was here for May. I'm going to go ahead and second that motion for May.
Thank you so much. Motion is made to motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes from our May meeting. Motion by Jason Lugo, seconded by Brian Mattson. Brian was not here. That's fine. You can still second that motion. Any discussion from either of you? Any changes you want to see?
Nope.
Okay, fantastic. In that case, anyone opposed to approving the minutes from our May meeting? Okay, motion carries. May minutes are approved. Next up, we have the July minutes. Could I get a motion to approve our July minutes?
A motion that we approve the July minutes.
This seems silly, but I'll second it, even though I wasn't here and I can't verify if those minutes were accurate or not.
That's all right. Jason and I can. They look good. All right, motion has been made and seconded to approve minutes from our July meeting. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes from our July meeting? Okay, motion carries then. And now next up on the agenda is we have a workshop on residential uses in commercial zones, and I think this will be kind of interesting. So Travis, do you have a presentation for us?
Sure, thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background and justification for why this is on your plate. And it is because Ordinance 1486 was passed June 21st of this year, and it is a 6-month moratorium against or for the acceptance of applications for residential uses in commercial zones. And the City Council just recently reviewed a ordinance for findings of fact for the moratorium, and that was ordinance number 1491, and that will be second reading September 7th. And the reason why this has come up is because we have had considerable amount of work on the housing action plan, but unfortunately we didn't have a lot of public participation. And so we had extended the grant for the housing action plan through June of next year. But at the same time, we are receiving a considerable number of interest in projects for mixed use and residential projects in commercial zones. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on that. Specifically, I think part of the problem occurred when we updated Ordinance 1447, which was our retooling our code batch, and it included one particular item, and that was our C2 zone referred to including all uses in the C1 zone. And upon reading that section, or I'm sorry, in the C3 zone, and upon reading that, staff noticed, specifically Melissa Johnston noticed, that it probably should say the C1 district instead of the C3 district. And the C3 district is our neighborhood commercial, our C2 is highway commercial, and our C1 is the central business district or the downtown core district. And when you looked at the original code, what it said is your C3 uses, which basically means grocery stores, are allowed in the C2 district. And that didn't make sense because our highway commercial district already allowed for retail sales. And the C1 district allows for a significant different type of commercial uses. For example, outdoor dining, whether it's dining patios or outdoor eating areas, those are allowed in the downtown core, but they were not allowed in the highway commercial district. And so we thought that that was a problem. And when we fixed it in Ordinance 1447, we kind of created a problem that we didn't anticipate, and that is because the C1 zoning district, our downtown core, was changed a few years ago to allow for residential uses. Specifically, it allows for live-work units and dwelling units, provided the residential uses are located above the permissible C1 commercial use, and that adequate off-street parking is provided. And it says that lobbies for residential uses are allowed on the ground floor. Then also, use number 37 is, or use 52 is residential use is allowed on the bottom floor of any building in the C1 zone that does not share a property line with Davidson Avenue and Gorig. And number 10 and number 52 and number 24 seem to have some inconsistencies about when residential is allowed on the bottom floor and when it is allowed upstairs. And it raises some concern that came up in some of the projects, and I'll get to those projects in a couple minutes. They raise some housing concerns. For example, like, are there adequate housing design standards that would affect residential? So in other words, do residential uses create different needs that are not covered by our design standards? So crime prevention through environmental design, open space and recreation needs, parking and storage and lighting. Some of those are addressed in the commercial design standards. For example, open space and recreation. Is landscaping considered open space and recreation for residential use? Or lighting, because they're required to put in street lighting, is that adequate conditions for a residential mixed use project? So there's some conversation that I think we need to explore there. Another issue is the density ratio of commercial to residential uses. In the Kirkland Senior Living specifically, they had a proposal with 5 stories of residential above 4 of commercial residential mix, but there was only a couple thousand square feet of commercial use. And the neighbors argued that it was in fact not a commercial development, it was a residential development. And it's hard to justify a commercial approval for what is residential project. And they brought up several examples of impacts on nearby zoning districts and uses. This also came into the conversation with the Belmont RV. But for Kirkland Senior Living, the question is, the commercial district has no maximum lot coverage. It has reduced or no setbacks. It has no density limits. So our medium density and high density residential zones allow for 25 to 35 units per acre maximum. But because the Kirkland Senior Living was in a commercial district, they were proposing 75 units per acre. And there's nothing in our code that addressed those residential densities. Pedestrian and vehicular traffic also may not be adequately addressed under our commercial standards because pedestrian connections, the volume of pedestrian traffic may not be adequately considered under our current commercial code. And then of course there's the environmental impacts, whether it's built environment or natural environment, for the compatibility of high density residential in commercial districts. And I'll get to some examples of that when I talk about the projects. There's also the question about the comprehensive plan and our employment goals. If we are using our commercial zoned property for residential developments with no density maximum, is there a chance that we're going to be able to achieve our 20 jobs per acre in the commercial zone, especially if we have no minimum commercial requirement for that mixed use? And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Also, the long range question of our housing action plan and our needs assessment. We did not consider that there would be any additional family or residential units in our commercial zone as part of the needs assessment. And then we have a goal to balance our single family and our multifamily diversity in our housing district or in our housing stock. But we have no mechanism to balance that because there are no commercial standards for density and housing type in the commercial zone. So during the moratorium, like I mentioned before, this is a pause on new applications with residential components. And we are hoping that this 6 months gives us time to develop code fixes and adopt those code fixes. So really there's two options. One is to adopt code changes within the next 6 months. And the other option is to develop a work plan, which would allow us to extend the moratorium up to 12 months for us to work on those code fixes. So really quick, I'm going to give you some examples of the issues that were raised by the code changes that we did with our retooling our code package. So if you take a look at the screen, you see a couple units on the right hand of 3rd Street. I don't know why it's labeled a better choice, but those two buildings there, they look like mirrors of each other mid-block. That is our central business district C1 zone. And those units were built as live work, but I don't know whether they have commercial uses in them. But this one brought to light the fact that there are no setbacks. So those properties are, those residential units are built extremely close to each other. They are built on the property line with minimum separation as required by building code. Plus, in the residential zone, like a typical residential lot will have a 50% lot coverage. And in that case, because we have no density or lot coverage requirements, those units cover about 80 to 90% of the lot itself. So that's kind of one of the first warning signs that we thought we might have a problem. This is the Kirkland Senior Living site, and if the Planning Commission remembers this, that there is an area in this bottom building on the bottom of the drawing where they had a small spa and a small pub area. but the majority of the structure is residential and residential lobby. The whole northern bottom of this bottom floor of this footprint is residential units. And then it was also 5 stories of residential. And so they ended up with 150 units, 75 units per acre with a reduced parking standard because they had connections to the Safeway parking lot and a plan for a shuttle service. Plus seniors, they had produced a traffic study that showed that they drove less and they used shuttles more, plus the fact that they could walk to Safeway and easily maneuver around the neighborhood walking, and they can reach everything from Horseshoe Lake to virtually the Walmart with an existing sidewalk network. And then also they are on the edge of the golf cart zone, which would allow them to have golf carts instead of fully sized parking cars. So this was an example of the structure that they were looking at building. And the city council reviewed this, and in the end, they felt that it did not warrant the comp plan and the zone change because it was inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and the commercial zoning district, that it was the right project in the wrong place in the wrong zone. So it was denied. There's also a pre-application conference. This is off of Belmont Loop, and in this case, the applicant, you may not be able to see this very well, but the applicant is proposing several buildings on the south side of this project is I-5, and it is a majority of parking lot and structures. I think there were 8 structures with 4 stories, so that would be 3 stories above commercial units and commercial parking. And it is currently in the commercial zone, and it's another example of a mixed use, but our zoning code didn't necessarily know how to handle the density and the commercial aspect of this proposal. There's also Belmont Loop Rv, and it was a considerable topic of conversation about whether or not this is in fact a residential development, because these are transient accommodations, and whether or not Belmont Loop would be affected, and is it compatible with the neighbors of whether it's commercial next to commercial or residential next to commercial. And without making a judgment as to whether or not this is a residential use, the issue of transient housing may be something that you want to get into the conversation on. So it was a significant area of interest amongst the community. So we figured we might want to include that in our discussion. And you can take a look at, these are the existing RV park in the city of Woodland. Then there's also one to the south where you see the kind of densities that you get. So if we were to consider that transient housing or transient accommodations to meet the standard for housing, these are the kind of issues that the neighbors are extremely concerned about when it comes to compatibility. So you may opt not to want to include RV parks as part of that discussion, but from a housing view, transient accommodation like RV parks and hotels, the reality is we need to include that in the discussion. And then there's also another project where they had proposed, this is another RV park that had a pre-app, and so there's another example of a high intensity, high density transient accommodations in the name of an RV park. And the question is, because those are not structures, do our commercial code adequately address transient accommodations in our design standards? So that is essentially my presentation. If you have any questions about that, I think it's mostly a discussion about your knowledge of these cases and what you think we should be talking about as a means of addressing our housing issues. in our commercial zone, that is. Melissa, do you have any thoughts or do you want to add anything?
Yes, so I think I'd summarize, I see two main issues here that we're talking about. One for the live work, for the live work uses, defining design standards for those, and then paying particular attention to our requirement for ground level commercial use to make sure that we're not losing commercial land. As long as the ground level is used for commercial uses, then upper levels could be used for residential without losing that commercial space. But the issue that we have been describing with the Kirkland Senior Living and Logan's Landing is kind of maybe misuse of that ground level. It's hard to say with the way we have code written now. We would have to change it to make a strong argument either way. But with Logan's Landing, for example, C1, an allowed commercial use is public and private parking lots. So they could say, well, we're offering parking, that's a commercial use. And Kirkland Senior Living was able to say, well, look, we're not on Gehrig, we're not on Davidson, so we can have residential on the ground floor. So I think the question we can look at the next workshop or hearing, depending on how fast we want to go as a commission, we can look at defining what is commercial use, what do we allow on the ground floor, and also what will it look like.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting stuff and kind of some law of unintended consequences going on here, I think. You know, this obviously isn't the, you know, we're not having the public hearing yet. But Jason and Brian, you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So going back to the live work units, you had an aerial photo of them. I was curious why they don't have any setbacks. I mean, even commercial usually has landscape screening requirements that keeps things off the property line, right? I mean, I don't.
So that's in our C1 zone, and our C1 zone really does not have those things. The C2 zone does.
The C1 zone doesn't have any landscape or screening.
Right.
So you could, and I know I always go back to Clark County code because I'm just more familiar with it because I work with it. But like in like the light industrial zones, you can be 0 if your building wall is right on the property line, you know, with a firewall, or 5-foot landscape screening. You know what I mean? So if for those buildings, I'm thinking of, you know, downtown on Davidson or whatever, they could be 0 where they're up against another property. But if they're not, and it's new, they would have to have the 5-foot landscape screen. It's just kind of an option. And also, and I don't know how you would wrangle this, but just my thoughts. If you're going to have residential, there should be lot coverage requirements. I'm okay with not having lot coverage for commercial because, you know, whatever. I think the parking and landscape screening sometimes drives that. But if there's residential, then lot coverage should come into play. And I'm not saying it has to be 50% lot coverage like normal residential, but I think that with residential, there needs to be some sort of quality of life, and lot coverage, I think, comes into that. Another of the thoughts I had is I don't know what kind of metric you would use to limit the ratio of residential to commercial. Because if you're going to allow residential above commercial, they're sharing the same footprint. So density versus what? Density for residential, obviously, but versus what for commercial? I mean, what kind of metric? I guess it would be a different metric for commercial than it would be for residential. Is there a ratio of floor space for commercial versus floor space of residential. I don't know how you would do that, but I definitely think that it would be wise to set some sort of limit on density for those mixed use areas, just because if you, and again, I know I was in favor of that Kirkland or Kirkwood or whatever, just because I thought it was a decent project, but that was a lot of density, right? I mean, I look back on that and thinking that's a lot of density, then that impacts a lot of the surrounding lots via parking, via traffic, and maybe that was in excess of what we would really want. Although, a housing crisis isn't going to fix itself by lowering density requirements, right? I get that. But what was I thinking of? Lastly, I don't know how you draw the line between RV parks and hotels, right? They're both the RV park folks are going to say that it's a hotel, whether that really happens in practice or not. But I don't think RV parks are an appropriate use in the commercial zones. I think that RV parks are better served in areas that are closer to recreation, right? Or something that gives purpose to somebody's temporary stay, like the Lewis River or natural areas, that type of thing. And the commercial areas really don't have that. I'm sure I had other thoughts rambling around in my mind, but those are the only ones that I could think of right now.
Brian, I have to completely agree with you 100% on a couple of those items, every single one of them. When looking at this, you're right. I said the same thing. Where is the 5-foot, vegetative screening or some type of buffer from residential to industrial, commercial, etc.? Where is that stipulation that states if it's a building associated with industrial, commercial use, it would need to be 10 feet from the parcel boundary, and there are kind of other methods to mitigate and shield residential from commercial or industrial or light manufacturing, etc. And then when it comes to that proposal for that dense development near the supermarket, I think the biggest issue was safety, where you have residents, typically older, navigating through, whether it's the parking area or sidewalks or side of the streets, larger industrial vehicles, trucks, etc. That was just the biggest concern there. But surprised that there isn't certain setback requirements when it comes to that, and exploring those options and the density. That's the particular problem. And then the RVs or it's if you consider it a sort of like a lodging or that type of accommodation, it's a little tricky. I know it's quite popular nowadays. Seeing a lot of that, proposals coming through, and whether or not it's a trend or just an indication that this is just part and parcel of the housing crisis. All things to consider, but yeah, you were right on point. I must be some type of planner, Brian. I don't know. I totally agree with you.
So, I had a project a while back where it was similar to this Kirkwood project, and their commercial on the ground floor was so small. It was a similar sized deal to this, and their commercial was about the size of a Subway. right? A Subway sandwich shop. And that's what they were claiming their commercial was, on the ground floor. And it's going, no, that's not enough commercial. Residential is only allowed on the above. And so what they were designing it for is they're designing it for like a Subway and maybe like a hair salon, tiny little portions of commercial. And then they were going to park. It was going to be underground or ground level parking, and then the residential was going to be above that. And I really thought they were intentionally skirting the commercial requirements to build, a lot of residential density, because Clark County doesn't have a limit on their density in their commercial either. And the only way you can do that is if you do the residential uses above the ground floor. And so they were designing it to get around actually providing any commercial at all. And I thought it was pretty problematic. So I think it's good that we're discussing this and maybe, giving some construct to actually how much commercial you have to provide, which to me should be all of the first floor. You can have a small lobby, I guess, but I think that we should require that the percentage of the ground floor, if you're going to allow residential above it, needs to be commercial, viable commercial. I mean, obviously, if you build commercial sites and they sit unfilled, that doesn't do anybody any good, but I guess at least it's space when somebody does want to move in there. I'm doing a mixed use project right now where they're going to do all of the residential first and leave the commercial for last. And I'm really concerned that the commercial will never be built. And I don't know if the hearings examiner will, because our code doesn't have anything that specifically prevents building all the residential first. It just doesn't.
Is that in a commercial zone or a residential zone?
It's in a mixed use zone. We have an actual mixed use zone up there. But again, if the code, doesn't specifically present it or put a metric to it, there's nothing to stop that.
Brian, are you saying that you're envisioning 100% commercial, the main level, first floor? Would that maybe include a public assistance office, a branch of the community library?
Yeah, I would fit those under the commercial umbrella.
Yeah,
but if it's a swimming pool for the residents, then no. Right. I mean, I'm just kind of looking at this plan, but not that I'm against swimming pools, but.
Oh yeah, man. The pro swimming pool lobby is going to come for you, Brian.
I know. I wish I would have said that now.
Well, yeah, I think we're off to a good start, and we're obviously going to have more opportunity to discuss this. My quick thoughts are, I think we do need to clarify clearly what it is we actually want with this code, right? Because the way we wrote the code didn't exclude projects that the city was not interested in, right? So clearly we need some clarification there. I think projects like this, if we can get them ironed out, projects that have commercial on the ground floor and residents above, I think are really fantastic. I think they go a long ways to solve two of our perennial problems in town. One of those is housing. So I think this is one way that we can provide a lot of housing without really having to change our code at all, right? And I don't think we should throw that out. I think that's really important. We haven't found a good way to provide that housing elsewhere. And I think this can go a long way to solve that and do it in a small area. And I think that's, another big issue we have in town is we're just limited in space, right? We are geographically constrained just by the natural geography, but also by, sort of more cultural geography where, our rural areas that surround us are also really important to the folks both in town and in those rural areas. And I think they're right. I agree with those people. I think we should try to preserve that character. So this kind of, something like this, where we've got a lot of residents, packed into a small area, which, it's clear that there's a lot of demand for that, really, meets both those goals. I do think that it was probably a mistake to just allow residential on the ground floor, kind of carte blanche. And I think it's important that we're, trying to address that now. I guess the other big advantage I see of these mixed use projects is, the other big problem in town that at least gets a lot of airtime is traffic, right? And traffic happens when people are moving from basically one use to another, and a lot of times that is from their residence to a commercial use. And if you can put those in the same place, it's not going to generate those trips, right? There's no guarantee that somebody that lives above a business is going to want to patronize that business, but when you have enough people in a small area, you're going to attract the sort of business that caters to those folks, right? So I think that's really good. I think I still think that, again, I will say it wasn't perfect. I think the Kirkland Senior Living Project was a good one. I do wish they had more commercial on the ground floor, but I think the location was actually, close to some medical services, close to the grocery store. I think that was a decent spot. And, the commercial traffic was an issue, but I think if commercial traffic is causing a safety hazard, then that's not necessarily an issue for zoning to fix. I think that's an issue for that commercial traffic to be, more, I guess, safe generally, because those, if we have sidewalks in town, those sidewalks are for anybody and everybody at any time, regardless of their age or ability. And if it is not safe for somebody to use those sidewalks, then I think that's a problem that we don't solve by excluding people from the sidewalk. We solve by making our infrastructure safer. I also think, live work units are really cool and a great idea and a great way to kind of incrementally develop an area. I think those couple of live work units that Travis showed us, weren't really that, right? I think they were maybe, taking advantage of our code to shoehorn something in that doesn't really meet the intent of our code. So again, I think that's unfortunately a lesson we learned there, that we didn't write the code well enough, or constrained enough. Which is too bad, especially because I think I'm generally in favor of less restriction on development and trying to encourage the things we want instead of outlawing the things we don't want. So that personally kind of pains me that it seems like the answer to that is to put stricter requirements on it. But if that's the case, so be it. So. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm really in disagreement with either of you. I think I probably see the density a little bit more positively than it sounds like. Jason,
Sorry, Tal, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm for density. I am for density. But I don't want so much density that the site can't handle, or the site's entirely covered up with asphalt parking because they have to provide so much parking for the density. I just think there should be a ceiling on it, is all.
Yeah, and I think, there's going to be some, just, by the nature of our parking requirements, there's sort of a natural cap there anyway, right? Like nobody's going to build a 20-story building that's, got a 100 square foot footprint, just because that's what it takes to fit the parking in there. I think again, my broken record. I think we should totally abolish our parking minimums, and if that leads to parking issues, that means we should charge more for our parking, because right now what we're doing is basically subsidizing private parking. And I don't really feel like we should be subsidizing any private uses. So yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. And I think that's something that we should definitely consider as we go forward. But at the same time, I think that was one thing I did really like about the Kirkland Senior Living Plans, that they were making the argument that they were light on parking, and they were going to encourage people who did not want to drive. And I think the mistake that people who opposed that made was not understanding that catering to a different population, it works, right? They did their market research and they understood that there was a demand for a living situation for people who don't drive. And I think some, people in town who do drive just sort of, didn't have the imagination to believe that could be possible. And I think that was, that's just a failure of understanding on some level. When really that could have, that project could have, again, solved several of our problems: housing, a little bit of commercial, and traffic. Anyway, that's I think that's water under the bridge to some degree. Travis, what we're trying to figure out is when we want to, what our timeline is on this. Is that our main goal this year?
So I think there's a couple questions, and that is because we have the moratorium in place for 6 months, that'll be until December. The question is, do you want to lay out some small ticket items that you think can address this before December? Or do you think we need to roll it into a bigger project that might take us till next June to hold a couple open houses and public discussions and a public hearing before we send it to the council? Or do you want a combination of those two? Do you think there's a couple that we can fix now, take the moratorium off, and then look at maybe some larger discussions like infill standards or mixed use standards after we make minor fixes to our commercial zone?
Well, I'm interested to hear what Brian and Jason think on this, but personally, I like that last option. I think I think it seems like there's, pretty broad agreement on a couple of things that I think we could probably knock out pretty quick, and then the more, maybe deal with the more nuanced and intricate permutations over a little bit longer term. Because I do think that, the moratorium is kind of a blunt instrument, right? And I think we should use it sparingly and try not to, basically as little as possible and as short as possible.
So
that's my take.
So Travis, I have I agree with you, Tel, by the way. I like the mixed approach. Travis, you're more experienced in doing this sort of cat herding with us and everything. You think it'll take longer than shorter, right?
Well, I think that there's stuff that we can drop into both baskets. The question is, once we maybe do this exercise, do we need to do the longer term basket under the moratorium? Or can we make some quick fixes, release the moratorium, and then take up some bigger projects? So I see, for example, stuff like mixed use standards or mixed use zone and infill. And also Melissa had brought up the idea that like Belmont Loop and the area between up near exit 22 between Green Mountain Road and Old Pacific Highway might be a great example for a master plan exercise But that would take a while, and whether or not we need a consultant to help lead us through that process, those are some of those longer term issues. But the quicker term issues that you brought up, issues like landscaping and setbacks, lot coverage. So I think those are examples of stuff that we could probably take care of in a hearing or two and get those done before the 6-month moratorium expires and get that up to the city council to look at.
Would some sort of minimum ratio of commercial be part of that as well? So I think that's important too. I mean, I do anyway. Also, I know that this is lately, there's been a lot of discussion. I would almost be in favor of removing RV parks as an allowed use in the commercial zone. I just don't see it as a good fit. And I mean, I think that there's been a lot of discussion about how that's going to fit in Belmont Loop, and I agree with them. I don't think it's a great fit. But I think that, you know, a lot of things that can happen initially, right? Before we take the long look at it, I guess.
I agree that makes the most sense. If you could work on those smaller ticket items that make a difference incrementally, makes the most sense. Taking that approach would seem ideal.
I guess, you know, if there is an issue that I think I'm trying to be cognizant of recently is that demands on staff have increased pretty dramatically this year. So I'm trying to be sensitive to that, and I wonder if there's, I don't want to volunteer anybody but myself, but I wonder if there's additional work that commission can do outside of meetings to, I don't know, grease the skids a little bit on this.
You know, another, I think, low-hanging fruit we might be able to get to very quickly we should look at the C1 and C2 uses and determine whether there are specific uses that are permitted that we do and don't want on the bottom floor of residential. That might be a very easy way for us to kind of put some sideboards around that. Like, for example, commercial parking is probably the flagship example of the commercial use on the bottom floor that we do not want. And in the case of the pre-app, we had already told the applicant in no unclear terms that ground floor commercial parking garage is not a ground floor commercial use that you can build residential above, because that's not a commercial use in any sense of the word.
I agree.
I like
A
that.
lovely stroll down the commercial down
Yes.
Davidson and looking at a parking garage of gray concrete. Come on, that's not what we want.
I think, yeah, I might go further and just remove it from our permitted uses altogether. Like at least at this point, I don't really see a place for commercial parking in Woodland anywhere.
Well, in the C1 district, in the actual downtown, it might be appropriate, because some of the C1 lots, the existing downtown lots, do have some ground level parking off of the alleys. In which case, so let's say, for example, we have some good downtown examples of each of the uses, and I'll go back to that section. So we have live work units, we showed those. Number 10, dwelling units located above permissible C1 uses. If you're familiar with the building right next door to City Hall, the Lovejoy Law Office and Art Gallery, and she has a residential unit above that. So that's an example of commercial uses with off-street parking in the back. And she has a walkway that allows her to get to the back end of her building on the bottom floor. Also, the Moose use is a great example because the Moose Lodge, you have 2 doors on either side, and then you have a stairway that goes to the use upstairs. So there's another example of if there's a residence upstairs, they have a staircase to get upstairs, and that staircase represents the lobby on the bottom floor between the commercial uses. But the majority of the commercial is all downstairs.
And those are 2 of my, favorite buildings in town. So I'm glad you brought.
Yeah. And then 52 is residential use is allowed on the bottom floor of any building in the C1 zone that does not share a property line with Davidson. And that's kind of the live work units that we've seen permitted on Bozarth and 2nd Avenue. Those have the potential of small office space out front, but the residence in the back. So the live work units that we discussed before are covered both by number 24 and number 52. So
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a situation of fool me once.
Are you talking about 52?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%.
There was a party involved, like very vocally and very actively in, shaping that change to code, who was very much not a disinterested party. And I think folks involved were a little bit too credulous about, that person's intentions.
Well, it didn't work out like we envisioned it. That stuff happens. I think the only live work units that are really viable that we would want would be commercial on the bottom, residential on top.
Yeah, and that's what I like. Yeah, and I think Lovejoy's building is a great example of that. I think maybe getting something built just like that these days might be a little difficult, but something of the same general plan seems pretty viable. They get called shop houses elsewhere in the world, and I think that's a really nice term also.
Another issue I forgot to bring up in this conversation is we've been wrestling with tiny homes and the issue of park models and tiny homes in RV parks has been discussed. And so I vacillate between being okay with removing RV parks, but on the other hand, that is an affordable housing option that if done properly could be awesome. So maybe
it is, yeah. I think maybe we might need to come up with a different concept though, instead of trying to shoehorn it into something we already know, because it's not like that is not, I think
You're not talking about it as transient housing though. You're talking, you want permanent housing, just smaller units, right?
Yeah. Well, and
So that's not an RV park per se.
yeah. And that's a great point. Because technically we learned this during the RV discussion, and that is transient housing is considered somebody, a transient is considered somebody who's on the move. And RV parks are the model for transient because the vehicles move. And one of my pet peeves about the city code is 90% of our commercial land is highway commercial, which is auto-oriented. And that implies that we're not worried about the traffic problems in town as long as you can get on and off the highway. If our priority is to accommodate traffic off of the highway instead of our internal commercial needs, highway commercial is the perfect way to do that.
Yeah, and that reminds me also that our C3 zone, I think basically I think it's a failure. I think it's a complete failure, and I think the solution to that is just to allow the C3 uses in our entire residential zone, right? Like I think, maybe not everywhere, but I think it would be nice to be able to have a corner store in a residential area, right? And that now all of a sudden, instead of somebody having to drive from the far end of town into town, they can walk down the street. And that, that takes a certain density, so they're not going to, that wouldn't work everywhere. But as we're talking about allowing ADUs, I think we would get that in some of our neighborhoods. And back to the RVs and tiny houses a little bit. I think that just doesn't fit into either really commercial or residential, right? Because if you think you got pushback for a project, an RV park in a commercial zone, imagine if that was an RV park in a residential zone. The acrimony that would be raised over that, I think, would be overwhelming. So we're stuck, right? Because commercial folks are arguing that it's really more of a residential use, but I don't think anybody would be really excited to have that next to in their residential neighborhood either. I think potentially a more the long-term idea of a community, of tiny homes or park model RVs is a different story, right? If people have some investment in the place and they're not just stopping through, I think that's a different story, because those people are by design part of that neighborhood and have some investment there. And it isn't really a commercial use at that point. I do sort of question, if we're thinking of RV parks a little bit like hotels, like when I stay in a hotel, I look for the closest, commercial services I can, right? And often they are way too far away, and it's really obnoxious. Like I would like to be able to just walk out the front of my hotel and find a grocery store or a convenience store or a restaurant, and those things don't really exist. And I have to imagine the same thing is true to some degree in an RV park. Again, that one's sort of the bridge.
The problem with RV parks is they were never intended to be commercial or residential. They were always intended to be recreational. But because of the lack of affordable housing and other factors, it's become an option for residential.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's sort of a different issue, right? I mean, you're absolutely right. There are, as we can see by the booming business that our new RV dealership is doing, there is a huge demand for new RVs. And I don't think, for the most part, that's, at this point at least, I don't think that's people who are, looking for housing. I think that's people who are looking for a change, and either, are at an age where they just want to adventure around all the time, or are, trying to downsize for whatever reason. So I wouldn't discount the recreational part of it, because it is, even if that's not right on the river, like it's not far from the river, and it's not far from Horseshoe Lake, and it's not far from the mountains. And people plan badly sometimes, and they, they might have wanted to get up into the hills with their RV and didn't make it, and they might just stop in Woodland for the night and buy a bunch of supplies on the way, and benefit our local business, and then just move on. I don't know. I'm not in the RV park business, so I don't know quite how that goes. But Anyway, I think maybe, this is not clearly this, it's not a hearing tonight. It's a workshop. That was neither here nor there, maybe a non sequitur. Yeah, I guess, how much do we want to get, hammered out tonight, and how much do we just want to, make a plan for how to move forward and settle this at future meetings?
So I think I have a list, going through your comments and listening to what you're talking about. Let me go through this list and tell me whether you think that this kind of encapsulates what you think we should maybe work on. Maybe a workshop next month and a hearing in, so workshop September, October hearing, and make a recommendation to the council for November. So these are the issues that I've gotten down. So the question of landscaping and setbacks in the commercial zone for residential uses. The ratio of commercial to residential use in a mixed use. The question of RV park removal, but moving that onto a long-term project of what constitutes an RV park and incorporating tiny homes. Lot coverage in the commercial zone, and I think that ties closely to density. And what does that include? Can that include landscaping? Can that or open space or critical areas or stormwater facilities? How do we calculate density for commercial uses? Defining or clarifying the first floor lobby standard or residential first floor uses. Clarifying maybe a ratio of residential to commercial square footage. Types of commercial uses which should be allowed below a residential uses. Multimodal connectivity, so in other words, pedestrian traffic, does it have a place to go? Is there connectivity options? And maybe adding some discussion of what constitutes live work and how those are designed. So I think those are things we could quickly put together some discussions and hold a workshop on next month.
Okay, that sounds like a lot to me, but I think some of them will are overlapping to some degree too. So I like them. I think, for example, if we are explicit about how much commercial is required on the ground floor, maybe that takes care of some of the landscaping issues.
Yeah, and I think some of that will answer itself simply because, if our commercial zone allows for maximum 4-story buildings, then the ratio might be 4 to 1. So if you put in 10,000 square foot of commercial, then you would get 40,000 or 30,000 square foot of residential, because 4-story structure can only have 3 stories above the commercial uses on the bottom floor. So some of those will answer themselves, and the parking limitation will determine how big the structure can be.
Okay. Yeah, I like those. Those seem good. Yeah, if you think we can bang those out in a meeting, then I'm all for it. I do think this is maybe a good, not next month, not for this batch, but I do think doing something with our C3 zone through this process seems like a good opportunity, because I think it really is, to me, it seems like kind of the other side of the coin of, putting, we're talking about how can we better fit residential into commercial uses, and I think the flip side of that is important too, and how can we mix some commercial uses into residential. And I'm not sure that it will come up at another time, and it's kind of been dangling out there for years. So I don't know, something that's on my mind. Again, Jason, Brian, what'd you think of
I like Travis's list, and I like your suggestion of doing something with the C3 also. I'm in complete agreement with every word you said, Tel.
Goodness.
I'm hypnotized by your expertise.
Oh dear.
You were throwing a lot of big words out there, so I just thought I'd try to alliterate a little bit.
I have to disagree, Brian, because I also agree with Tal 100%.
All right, cool. So Travis, it sounds like you feel like you've got some good direction there, and we all feel good about your direction too. Everybody feels great. This is quite the conciliatory group here this evening.
Melissa, do you have any thoughts, just for those of you who don't know, I am actually going to be on vacation next month during the Planning Commission week.
Unacceptable, Travis.
Yes, well, too bad. So Melissa will be taking that lead. I want to make sure that she's comfortable with the direction she's got for that discussion.
The one potential code fix that I might have put on your list, I don't think you said this one, but I'm curious if you'd like to discuss at the workshop an overlay zone, or making a new zone that is mixed use, if you'd like that to be one of the topics.
That's a big topic if you want to do a new zone. I mean, that is a big topic. That might be better on its own as far as packaging it with the rest. But I understand why you see it. It is somewhat related, but if we're going to create a new zone, that seems like a big chunk to bite off.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm with Brian on that one. And yeah, because that's an interesting and important thing to talk about, and one possible solution. Yeah.
So second question for you is, I think it might help to define the workshop just a little more for next month. And the specific topic of the moratorium is residential use in a commercial zone. And for the workshop, we have a range of topics that seems listed here. We might want to talk about rewriting the C2 and C1 permitted use list. And if that's the case, I see RV fitting in that as a commercial use. So we could look through all of the commercial uses and decide what is allowed. But if we're primarily talking about residential use in a commercial zone, I think maybe RV use is best saved for another hearing or another workshop, which we may want to do soon. It is a pressing issue. But do we want to bundle it for this workshop next month?
I think that seems different enough to warrant its own.
So Travis, are you guys considering the RV park residential use?
Well, so Melissa, I think we in our staff report considered it a commercial use, but that might be worth a 10 or 15 minute conversation at the workshop and the public hearing. If you guys want to definitively make a determination, is it commercial or residential, having that direction actually would be really helpful for staff.
Our code does clearly define it as commercial, and also the hearing examiner found it commercial.
Yeah,
I'm okay with talking about it. I mean, I know sometimes we tend to go down a rabbit hole, right? And if we've got a bunch of other topics, we'll have to do our best to stay on topic. But I'm okay discussing it if you guys are, if Jason and Tel and Sam are.
I'm not sure, only because that's a hairy topic that could potentially mothball into something greater with various tentacles, let's just say.
yeah.
If you think it'll derail the other work that we're trying to do and suck the air out of the room to one particular issue, then I think you guys are right to push it off.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, just because it's been such a hot button issue in town, I think that's going to draw a lot of attention, which is good, like, public engagement is good. I guess, chasing controversy for public engagement probably isn't a great idea, but yeah, it does, to me, it seems like a little bit different issue, kind of an adjacent issue. And I think, figuring out where that fits, in our code might be separate from residential on the ground floor. I would say if it seems, I don't know, if it seems really easy to, like, as you're developing, staff reports and language, if it seems really easy to fit it in there and really straightforward, then I would say go for it. But yeah, I'm kind of with Jason mostly. It seems kind of thorny.
I think Melissa, you started the thought process of maybe separating that. So I'll go with staff on that. Whichever way staff wants to go. I defer to you, Melissa.
Or Travis, if we're in a hurry to have this discussed, we could do back-to-back workshops, maybe. Or we could talk about it after the meeting.
Yeah, I think we can game plan, and we could always set up the staff report to include our low-hanging fruit, the stuff we think that you guys will be able to get through. And if there's 12 items on there and you can agree on the first 9 and you skip 10, do 11 and skip 12, then at least we have 10 items checked off, and we can move ahead with those. And those other 2 units, we can continue it to another work session, or we can put it off to work on over the next year. But I think we can put together some kind of quick staff analysis and let you decide whether you think it's something that you want to skip a couple items on that list and keep making progress. I mean, that's your way to take our input and decide whether you want to tackle it or not. I think that's the purpose of the Planning Commission.
Okay. I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with, maybe having an ambitious agenda and seeing how far we get.
Yeah, because we might introduce some ideas and thoughts that make you think it's got nothing to do with the moratorium. Let's put that off and take care of business.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Jason, Brian, what do you think?
I am agreeable to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Very amenable.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, I think we're wrapped up on that one then. Thank you both for the work you're doing on that. And yeah, you have some staff reports for us before we call it a night.
Melissa, is there anything you want to cover in particular that you think they need to know about? Hot topic?
Sure. I can update the most recent site plan review applications. We have had an application for Oak Village Apartments. They are proposed to be on Green Mountain Loop and Green Mountain Road. And that notice of application has been posted on the website and emailed out. So if you have comments or questions about that project, please send them into staff.
That's not going to come before commission again, is it?
It will not go to commission. Yes, it does not require a hearing. It will be a staff decision.
Okay.
I'm glad we have some multifamily housing coming in.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny spot, but we'll see. I'll be interested to see what it looks like. Yeah, I might be interested in looking at their submittals, what their plans look like, because it could be really cool.
keep emailing you as when the decision is issued. So I'll keep you on that feedback loop. Belmont Loop Rv, as we discussed, was appealed to council, and council did deny the appeal. We will also keep you posted if that gets appealed again to county court. I have not heard that it has been appealed, but I think we're still in the appeal window. Kirkland Living Center has a new proposal. It's now proposed as Kirkland Makerspace, and it will include individual units that can be used by small commercial or industrial uses. So kind of like incubator workshops and a place to get a small business started. That
sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, we've seen parts of the application so far, and we'll, when the notice of application goes out, you'll be on that list. You'll see a little bit more information in your email.
That is the same applicant and the same lot as the Kirkland?
Yes.
No. Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Certainly
Well,
a need for that.
I'm glad they're trying again.
Melissa, you want a quick update? Don't forget on the website, because that's pretty cool. I'm jazzed about that.
Yes, we did talk a little bit about that last month, but we've moved on to the next phase, which is designing our features, and it will include a parks and trails database, and we have a new projects feature, which will be really nice for our department to post these site plan reviews that I just mentioned, or any other of the planning projects that are underway will be much easier to find on our website and have more information on that page. So on the spot, I'm trying to think of the other features we talked about. An event calendar, I believe.
Possibility of an interactive for zoning.
Mm-hmm.
Should be able to
right, yes.
hearings and agendas faster.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, yeah, because having two different websites is kind of strange.
Ease of use and being able to locate forms by name. There should be a lookup for documents and forms. Lots of much easier, simpler, cleaner navigation around the website. Not as complex, and things won't be as hard to locate.
So we're working on fast tracking this web update project, and hope to have it done well before the end of the year.
I've always been pretty impressed by well-run websites, right? Everybody wants everything on their website, but then you put everything on the website and then you can't find anything because everything's on the website, right? So when someone does design one that you can actually find stuff, it's impressive to me. Mainly because I'm a moron with technology most of the time. So,
well, no, I mean they do. It's hard, right? And I guess that's why people charge so much for it. But yeah, to put a lot of features on without it getting cluttered is pretty tricky. Scott and Joe, before we wrap up, just kind of in the interest of being inclusive, I want to make sure either of you had anything you wanted to say to the commission before we wrap up. So I'm not seeing anything from you, so I'm going to assume that you don't. Well, thanks everybody once again. Thanks staff so much for all the work you did preparing. Thank you, Jason and Brian, for giving up your Thursday evening. And thanks Scott and Joe for hanging out with us for a little while and being interested. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
I second that. Could be adjourned.
All right, motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you everybody so much. I'm still looking forward to the day I get to see you all face to face. I know Scott might not be looking forward to that, but I am. All right.
Thank you, staff. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Hey, Travis, Melissa,
Yes.
Travis is still there. Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool that Brian came up with excluding RV parks from commercial zones. That was one of my ideas, and that was pretty cool. That was very cool, I thought.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yep.
I don't know if you were